Yes, we do. Good afternoon, everybody. Tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai haere mai. Welcome to this elected members workshop on the Water Service Delivery Plan implementation for the Waters Working Group development of technical inputs for investigation and study. We will get underway, I think, with a karakia from Councillor Maxwell, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hei no I tātou let us wait. E te atua whakatūwheratia mai ki a mātou ngā kuaha, o te tika, o te pono, o te māramatanga i tēnei wā inga wā katoa. Ko ihu kraiti, hoki tō mātou kai whakaora. Āmene. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Maxwell. Thank you very much. And just as a reminder, we had to abandon our workshop on the 14th of July, and so we will be continuing on with the material that was in that workshop. Last time we worked through the financial assessment information, and today we'll move on to the other technical inputs such as the ownership and representation, as well as a bit of a discussion on the draft Water Services CCO investigation report, which has dropped into your Stella just recently, councillors, so you might want to go and find that at some stage. I'd just like to note that we've got Craig Tiriana and Russell George and Stavros Michael here with us today, as well as Nick Davies from Martin Jenkins Online. Good afternoon, Nick. Can you hear us okay?
I can. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Stavros. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou katoa, through you, Madam Chair. Just a very quick a reminder that, as this exploration of options by the councils in the collective working group, is progressing, and that this council will eventually have to make a decision cognizant of all the information in front of you, with regards to the direction you wish to travel, and especially consistent with the commitment we have made to the Minister in September last year through the submission of our delivery plan, which committed for us to work with our colleagues in the Eastern Bay of Plenty to explore the merits of a delivery option either via a collective jointly owned CCO or through an in-house delivery option. It is quite important for all elected members to remain attuned to and familiar with the investigations, the outcomes, the detail of this exploration. So when in September you are asked to exercise your right to express a preference from one proposal or another proposal, that you are in full possession and knowledge of all the relevant technical, financial, and obviously governance information that relates to that kind of decision. As you noted, Chair, last time we had this workshop, we were forced to cut it short because of the or the facilities constraints in here too. So we'll pick it up from where we were then, and then we'll work through the various governance style of information that you need to be aware of. And of course, happy to respond collectively to any questions elected members may have in that direction. So I'll leave it to Greg, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much.
Kia ora koutou. Everyone said what I needed to say today, so I'll quickly jump us back to where we started in the last hui, and I'll do that for the purposes of not everyone was there a fortnight ago, and also this will be recorded for purposes that other people can look at it in the future as well. So today we're going to just recap the progress so far of the working group. We'll look at some technical subjects where we got to, and last time we tackled the financial details, and we were about to do the ownership representation when we had to leave the room. So you've got that. I've also got some copies of the A3 here if anyone needs a physical copy that went out last time for you to look at, and I'll pass those around because they will be useful when it speaks on that. I think we're well clear of what what we're here to do. The technical evidence is emerging in the working group, so they've had 7, nearly 8 meetings now, of which they've been listening and shaping technical inputs into the draft report as it stands right now. That draft report is due to be finalised I think it comes to them on the 17th of August, so that's a Monday, a few weeks away. At the moment we have a draft which is shaped up by the thinking so far, and there was a few, I suppose, edits and a few other questions that were asked in the most recent meeting in Kawerau last week. So that's well underway. That's a recap of where we have been as a council here. Obviously there was a decision made around having a multi-stage approach to the delivery of the water services. Currently it's been delivered in-house until 1/7/2028. That's within the legislation, and that's also what was determined by the council at the time to be the right thing to do. And then it may be delivered by a multi-council water service organisation, depending on the result of the study really, and then the decision making that follows. So say the working group's been going. We've had workshops to discuss this. I suppose the work that had emerged and as it was set out late last year in the induction. Then we had a workshop in March, and that would have been the one when Max Baxter came and spoke to councillors at that point. Former Mayor of Rotorua, and who's been on working groups around Waikato waters. We also had a progress report to the Infrastructure Committee and a couple of other workshops to look at in real detail at the technical work. And then we're obviously going to pick that last bit up today. It's always important to probably stress that when the assessment will be completed or in the document, it's against this criteria, which was back first looked at here in March and across the other councils, our partner councils being Kawerau, Opotiki and Whakatane. This is, I suppose, to come up with a criteria of looking at the two models, which will be the multi-council model or an in-house equivalent or status quo. So those are the 7 criteria that were agreed to as strategic objectives. This is probably just really, again, to highlight where we're at. And I think the important thing to remember is there's a couple of other tranches of work that are ongoing. While this is specifically to the implementation of our water service delivery plan, also within the organisation, we're currently looking at the long-term water strategy, which has to be set by, I think it's early next year. The draft of that will be available to councillors to consider at the end of this year. The water service strategy going, we've got the ongoing ring fencing of our water service operation as it currently stands in terms of the new legislation, so that can be adhered to and reported on to our government representatives to show that we're doing the right things. They've just completed our first information disclosure, as I think how they term it, to the Commerce Commission. That was completed last month. We've yet to have any feedback from Commerce Commission around good or bad. We're just probably in a queue with everyone else that's submitted at the same time. So nothing to report there as yet, and we're about to provide our second update to the previous, I'm not sure what it's called now, but it was the water service unit within Department of Internal Affairs. That's now transferred into the new entity under government. So we're about to put our second report to them, that how we're tracking against this plan, which is effectively what we see in front of us. We're into the July-August period as a working group, and there's some other tranches that are going. Iwi engagement has been started and continued since locally, and there has been ongoing comms, just really as an awareness of what's going on in the program and keeping up to date with the working groups, sort of any releases out of the working group, anything they've signed off on, and sending that out into the public on our website, which has, I suppose, the previous legislation right through to the technical requirements now and anything that's been happening. So there's quite a repository of information on Council's website for anyone that's interested to delve into it. Oh, I think I've covered that. That's really where the particular subjects at the working groups, but it's a good, just a reminder for you in your information about how the subjects have gone to the working group and what it was that the direction or feedback that's in the bottom part of that. Right, we're over to Nick, and I think Nick's going to do a presentation obviously on the ownership representation. We'll quickly look at the draft implementation plan, and then we'll also talk about the draft report as it currently sits with the working group. So if anyone's got any questions about the process to now, we're happy to take them now. Cool. Nick, we're with you. Are you happy to take any questions as they arise, or do you want them packaged up?
No, happy to take questions as we go. Thanks, Greg.
Over to you.
All right, so we can move just to the next slide. So at the last two Waters Working Group meetings, so that's the June meeting and the July meeting, we've discussed with the working group a straw person proposal for the ownership, representation and governance arrangements for the joint water services CCO option, and that is best understood and looked at in terms of the A3 diagrams that have been circulated, and as part of the background material we've also provided similar A3s that describe the ownership, representation and governance arrangements that have been put in place for other water services organisations around the country. I just want to stress that in relation to the ownership, representation and governance arrangements, it's not Martin Jenkins' role to make recommendations in this area. So in other parts of the report where we've undertaken a strategic assessment of the options, we've undertaken the financial analysis, and we've developed recommendations around stormwater. That has been our advice. But when it comes to the ownership, representation and governance arrangements, our role has been to prepare material to facilitate discussion about the choices and to support the Waters Working Group to provide direction around the preferred model. And that's really important because ultimately the ownership, representation and governance arrangements for these water organisations should reflect the particular circumstances of the participating councils and the communities that they serve. So I just wanted to kind of make that clear before we sort of get into it. In terms of the key areas to consider, so as I said, the easiest way to get your head around the proposed arrangements is to turn to the A3, but before we do that, I'll just provide an overview of the model so that you can see how the different components relate to each other. And probably the first thing to begin with is just to recognise that a water services CCO is a statutory entity, and its purpose, objectives, functions and powers and the process for establishing an organisation are contained in the Local Government Water Services Act. And that Act is quite prescriptive and it constrains what is possible. Under the legislation, water services CCOs must be established as companies. No other legal form is permitted, and only councils and consumer trusts can be shareholders of those companies. So no other party is permitted to hold an ownership interest in a water services CCO. To date, all of the water services CCOs that have been established around the country are either single council owned organisations or multi-council owned companies. So no water services CCOs are proposed to be established with consumer trust structures. In terms of how the companies are owned, how the representative arrangements work, what matters are reserved for shareholder decisions, how voting works, and the detailed governance arrangements such as board size and the appointments process, those things are all set out in a company constitution and the shareholders agreement. So councils have considerable flexibility to design how they wish those arrangements to look. There are a few things that are important to bear in mind. First, I'd make the observation that people are often fixated on the question of ownership and what proportion of shares they hold. As for most companies, that's the key mechanism by which the company is controlled and influenced. For a water services CCO, however, shareholding is probably not the most significant consideration, and that's because the ownership rights are significantly constrained by the legislation. So owners of a water services CCO face obligations to maintain services that they can't escape. So if a water services organisation fails, councils remain responsible for ensuring that essential water services are delivered. Further, a water services CCO is prohibited from disposing of assets or shares in the company, and significant assets, that is, in terms of network water infrastructure. So typically, owners also choose to set water services CCOs up on a not-for-profit basis, and so there's typically little beneficial economic interest in the shareholding as well. So some quite significant differences there which constrain what ownership means, and as a result, shareholding is really only relevant for voting on a limited set of shareholder reserved matters. For a multi-council water services CCO, the shareholders of that company would typically choose to set up a representative oversight body, and that's that box in the middle of the slide there. A representative forum is an efficient way for shareholders to perform their role in relation to the entity, and typically it would include developing the statement of expectations, appointing directors, and monitoring the company's performance. And as such, the design of the representative oversight body, including the number and distribution of members and voting rights, is usually the most important factor to consider when in terms of determining what influence a council will have over the entity. The statement of expectations itself is a particularly important mechanism in the context of a water services CCO because it carries a strong statutory weight. The water company is required to give effect to the statement of expectations, and it's the principal means by which shareholding councils convey their requirements to the board of a water company. It's also important to note that the Act requires boards to be independent and for the appointment processes to be competency-based, and this extends to there being prohibitions on the appointment of current elected members or council staff to the board. So members of the board need to be independent of their shareholders. So with that overview, we'll turn to the first of the A3s, and if you can just move to the next slide.
It's hard to see that one.
So there's a lot of detail on this slide, so that's you're best to refer to the A3 itself if you can kind of see it. So what we've done with the working group is we've worked through a structured set of questions to determine the working group's view on ownership, representation, decision-making, voting rights, and also the governance arrangements. And this slide sets out the detail of the matters to be worked through when considering these issues.
Nick, can we take a quick break, please? Nick?
Yes.
Okay. Just for clarification, for our elected members, you noted earlier that under the relevant legislation that establishes a CCO, if a CCO fails financially, the financial liabilities of that CCO revert back into the constituent councils. Is that correct?
Is that a question for me, Stavros?
Yes, Nick. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yes, in that, these CCOs will typically borrow from LGFA and the shareholding councils will guarantee that borrowing. So yes, by virtue of that mechanism, councils would be liable.
Okay, thank you. The second question I have, if the same CCO failed, do the board of directors have any direct liability because of that failure?
Potentially is the short answer. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, the water organisations are companies and they operate under the Companies Act, and that means that as directors, they need to observe the director duties, including duties in relation to solvency. Yes, in short, there is potential liability dependent on particular circumstances and the director's role in that process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, back over to you, Nick. I think there's no further questions at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just touch through each of the matters that need to be worked through when determining the ownership and governance arrangements. In terms of the first matter, the ownership, as I mentioned, ownership of a company takes the form of shareholding, so the key matter to determine here relates to the basis for allocating shares between the participating shareholding councils. And as you will see from the material that was circulated, there was a number of different options here for determining the allocation of shares. You can do it on the basis of population, on the number of water connections, or you could choose measures such as net asset values as a way of representing the relative shareholdings. When we look across the country, the most common models are water connections and net asset values, and each has its own pros and cons, which are dealt with in the reports that have gone through to the Waters Working Group. In very simple terms, water connections are easy to apply. It's a simple measure to use, but doesn't necessarily reflect the assets and debt contributed and may disadvantage councils with non-resident ratepayers. Population is similarly simple, but doesn't capture urban and rural differences between councils and differences in the extent of council service provision. Net asset values is a relatively common method. It's often easier for people to relate to shareholding because it relates to the assets less the debt that has been contributed to the entity. And saying that, it is a slightly more complicated and costly way of allocating shareholding because it requires updated, coordinated asset valuation processes across the participating councils. When we discussed ownership with the working group, we primarily focused on the choice between net asset values and water connections as the most likely basis for determining ownership. And we noted that in the case of the 4 councils, either of these 2 measures would generate a very similar ownership outcome. So for Rotorua, based on today's figures, you're looking at either sort of 61% or 64% ownership, depending on whether water connections or net asset values are used. A further consideration is whether ownership is fixed in time or dynamic and subject to review and periodic update. And particularly in faster growing areas, maintaining ownership relativities can make sense, but we haven't gone into that level of detail for the purposes of this exercise, simply noting that it can be made flexible over time. So that's the ownership set of issues, and what I'm going to do is I'll just run through each of these boxes and then we'll turn to the practical straw person example just to give you a sense of where the Waters Working Group has landed on each of these things. So the next box there relates to the representative oversight arrangements. All multi-council water services CCOs that have been established or are proposed to be established have incorporated some form of shareholder council or stakeholder forum into their governance arrangements, and that simply reflects that it's a practical way of coordinating the various council interests. The key choice here relates to whether the forum should include shareholder representation only, as is currently the case with Waikato Waters, for example, or whether it should include representation of other stakeholder groups, including iwi. Central District's Water, Waiti Waters, EOY in Hamilton and Waikato districts, and Te Ake Wai in the Wellington region have all put in place representative arrangements inclusive of iwi representatives. A further practical consideration when it comes to the representative oversight group is how many reps each shareholder gets and how, in practice, iwi representation would be determined. So those are the sets of issues to be worked through there. The next most important consideration, we're turning to box 3 here, is the allocation of decision rights. Typically, a limited set of important decisions are reserved for decisions by shareholding councils, including changes to the constitution or shareholders' agreement, the entry or exit of new councils from the arrangement, the winding up of the company or major transactions, including things like bringing a new council into the Water Services CCO. Other matters that are sometimes reserved for shareholders relate to pricing principles and whether or not to allow dividends. And so it's through that mechanism of setting shareholder reserved matters that the certain important matters are restricted to shareholder only decisions, whereas decisions in relation to other matters such as the development of the statement of expectations, board appointments and removals, the adoption of the board skills matrix, performance oversight of the company, and review of the water services strategy and budget are typically delegated to the representative forum. So in that sense, decision making is distributed between shareholders in terms of those important matters and the representative forum in terms of those more routine matters. Often voting rights are subject to decision-making thresholds, so that's box 5 there, and this is where, for example, if you've got a single majority council, balance is brought to bear, across the group of participating shareholders. So when it comes to thresholds, often you might have a supermajority required for certain important decisions to ensure that it's not just votes and the allocation of votes that determines those decisions, but also factors in how many councils, for example, need to be on board with a decision before it can carry. So that's something that's most easily talked through when we turn to the A3. In terms of governance, this is usually a little bit more orthodox. This is about setting minimum and maximum board size, director term length, how the board skills matrix gets determined and how the appointment process works. So those are the things that are contained in that, that box on the top right-hand corner. And then finally, there are a small set of decisions that need to be discussed in terms of whether or not to permit the Water Services CCO to pay dividends or not, and whether to place constraints on the entity in terms of the pricing approach. So those are the matters that we've been working through with the Waters Working Group. And as you'll see, if you turn to the next A3, which is sort of where it gets brought to life, this is the straw person or proposal that has been developed with input from the Waters Working Group and was, there's been some refinement to this at last week's meeting, which I can talk to, but that this is the sort of the straw person that was discussed at the June meeting. In simple terms, the straw person model is based on shares allocated according to net asset value. So as I mentioned, that translates into about a 64% ownership for Rotorua Lakes Council based on today's values, but noting that proposed decision-making thresholds for shareholder reserved matters would also require a majority of shareholders to support decisions on any of those shareholder reserved matters. And you can see, if you look in towards the top left-hand corner there, there's a list of the sorts of matters that are proposed to be restricted to shareholder decisions, and they relate to things like changes to the Constitution or shareholders' agreement, the entry or exit of councils, the winding up of the company, major transactions above an agreed threshold, and things like pricing principles. Two options were presented for the representative model. You can see those illustrated on the top right-hand side of the A3. One of those options involved iwi representation on the forum. That's option one. And the second option was presented just with shareholder-only representation. And at the most recent Waters Working Group meeting that was held last week, the Waters Working Group indicated a preference for option one as part of that. In terms of what the representative oversight group would do under this proposed model, they would have responsibility for board appointments, adoption of the board skills matrix, development of the statement of expectations. They would be responsible for reviewing the water services strategy and annual budgets produced by the water services company, and they would be responsible for monitoring the performance of the company. In terms of how decision-making rights would work at that representative forum level, the proposal is that they would aim for decisions to be made on a consensus basis in the first instance, but with a fallback to voting if required. And the proposed approach is a blended model, with shareholder representatives having an absolute majority of votes allocated broadly in proportion to population, but with a certain minimum number of votes for smaller councils, and also with iwi representatives having voting under this arrangement. In terms of governance, the proposal is for a minimum board size of 5 and a maximum of 7 directors, and a maximum number of reappointments of 3 terms, and a merit-based appointments process consistent with the Act. The Waters Working Group also discussed dividends and concluded that no dividend should be provided for on the basis that any surplus should be available to be reinvested into the infrastructure rather than resulting in higher charges for customers. And the group also supported an initial pricing approach based on a cost to serve model, and that means that each district would be responsible for meeting the costs associated with delivering services in that district. So there would be no harmonisation of charges across the different participating shareholding councils under that arrangement, with a review period after 5 years. Shareholding councils would ultimately retain decision rights around whether there would be a change from that cost to serve arrangement. So I'm conscious that's quite a lot to take in. The version of the A3 that you've got in front of you is what was initially provided to the Waters Working Group, and as I mentioned, that has been refined slightly as a result of the discussions last week, and I can touch on those further. But it's probably a good point at which to kind of pause and take questions.
Thank you, Nick. So, councillors, if you've got any questions, maybe just ask who you're directing the question to. Do I have any questions? Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Kaifon.
Thank you, Chair. Nick, can I just clarify just that slide there? So are we saying we've got a 64% shareholding, Whakatane 25 and Aporiki 7, but then if it comes to doing shareholder reserve matters, effectively are we voting equally then not in proportion to our shareholding. Just want to understand, are we being disadvantaged just the way the votes have been allocated as opposed to the shareholding? So if you look at the top 1A, ownership, we've got the differences in the number of shares that are held by each council.
Yeah.
And then are you saying that, so if we were to vote on changes to Constitution and those sorts of matters in the reserved shareholder matters, are we voting in proportion to our shareholding, or is it one vote per council? So does that mean we get one vote, the others get one vote each when we're looking to, for example, change a constitution?
So you could potentially have decision-making thresholds around each of those different matters, and we haven't at this stage gone to the level of detail around that. That would be something that would be considered further as part of the detailed implementation. But what is proposed in general terms is that for those particularly significant matters, and a change to the Constitution would probably fall into that category, that there needs to be a balance between size in terms of shareholding and the ability to carry decisions on the other hand. So what is proposed there is that there would need to be a supermajority, and that means that you would need Rotorua and at least one other council in order to carry those sorts of changes. And that just simply reflects you going to the kind of the heart of decisions that have been the basis for establishing a joint water company in the first place. So there would be a decision-making threshold that would apply to each matter, in addition to votes being taken just on the basis of shareholding alone.
I suppose where I'm coming from for this is that in some situations it's beneficial to Rotorua, in other situations we're actually disadvantaged, because if you go down to the second line around representation oversight, so with or without iwi representatives, potentially if we were to look at current alignment around potential Head Start partnerships, then the Whakatane District Council, Poriki and Karalf, but if they voted as a block because they are unitary, then we would always be outvoted. Is that how I read that, or not?
Well, it could work in both directions, I think.
That's why I say it depends on which allocation of votes you are using, whether it's one vote per council in that situation, or is it in proportion to the shareholding. And so the two things don't necessarily align, and so I'm just not sure how you would structure it so that
what we've tried to apply here is it's a common principle that's been applied across all of the water services organisations that we're aware of, is to ensure that there's a majority sort of decision making, and that majority should factor in and give more weight to councils that are larger in terms of contributing a greater share of net assets, or that represent a larger community on the one hand, whilst also ensuring that you don't have a situation where there's negative control, or one council having a veto right, if you like, over decisions. And ultimately that can be quite a delicate balance in terms of, as I'm sure you can appreciate. So there are a number of different sort of permutations around this, but the model that's on the table is sort of where the Waters Working Group got to, having considered all of the kind of the pros and cons of those different arrangements.
Thanks, Nick. Maybe Councillor Sanford might like to make some comments. Or
Hi, Nick. I'm just going to add on to your comments there, just around the representative oversight. From my perspective, working through this, what really becomes important is the thresholds that we put in place. So in terms of the number of people around the table, we would have on this model one rep, and on this model that one rep would have 6 votes. And then it crosses over into where it's talking about thresholds, and we haven't actually, I don't believe we have anywhere agreed on a final solution here, but to your point, option 1 would mean that potentially we would lose the vote that you're talking about, and option 2, I think, would mean that we wouldn't lose the vote. So I think they would need us if those 3 councils were strictly voting in a block together, they would need us under a 75% model, unless they had also the iwi votes, obviously. But yeah, this is where I think as this work continues, the thresholds around decision-making and voting rights becomes really important to get right. But we haven't got that far yet.
Thank you. Yes, further question? Yes.
Just a follow-up question then, and it comes back to something that we've just been grappling with our other CCOs, is that when you appoint a director to a board, then their obligation is as a director to the board, not to the individual region in which they represent. And so then how does this work in this situation where effectively you're saying our one director for Rotorua has our 6 votes and is supposed to vote in accordance with the Rotorua sort of well-being of our community, as opposed to the Whakatane representative who should be voting for the Whakatane community when they're sitting as directors at a board, they're supposed to be working as directors for the best of the company to try and, in this case, if they're going to create dividends, then they should be looking for the best commercial outcomes. So I'm just not sure how those 2 sort of director responsibilities as opposed to community responsibilities sit together within a corporate structure under a Companies Act model.
So the representative oversight body would not be the directors. Those are the representatives that we're appointing. So, for instance, it would probably be the mayor who would be sitting in that role. Tanya, sorry. But then you would have the board of governors sitting beneath that representative oversight body.
Is there anything you want to add to that, Nick?
Well, firstly, just to agree with that response, that's accurate. I think, so in terms of the Rotorua's representative on that representative forum, which could be a political, appointment, that person is there to represent the interests of the Rotorua community, if you like. An important role that representative group plays is to develop the statement of expectations, which, as I mentioned, carries a statutory weight. So the board of the company must give effect to that. And so it's the statement of expectations, which is the principal mechanism by which the representative forum, reflects the community expectations of the board. So that is an important document, and when it comes to the board itself, they, as individual directors and as collectively, they are there obviously to kind of carry out their duties in relation to the statutory purposes of the entity. The board directors of a water services organisation will operate in a very constrained regulatory environment, so they have obligations in relation to drinking water quality, in terms of compliance with the resource management consents and system, in terms of economic regulation as well. And then in addition to that, they must give effect to the statement of expectations that is determined by the shareholder or the representative forum. So in that sense, they are quite constrained in terms of what they can do, and certainly it should be clear to them what the community expectations of them are.
Thanks, Nick. I'll move on to Councillor Timara Benfell and then Councillor Patterson. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. This is probably more of a question for our working group, but potentially for the team. Can I just ask why or how we've arrived at one rep per territorial authority? How we arrived at that model?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I can't give you the full answer, but in my mind, I'm still unsure whether it's actually one iwi rep per territorial authority, or if we're just going away to say to iwi, there's 4 possible iwi spots, you decide on how those work across the entire for districts. I'm uncertain of where we've landed on that. My understanding is we've told iwi to go away and say this is potentially going to be the model, and you come back and tell us how you would like to be represented.
Awesome. Okay, so in terms of arriving at one representative for each territorial, in terms of the, one representative having the 6 votes, 4 votes, te mea, have we, or is that just something that's been put up as an idea? There's no rhyme or reason around it, just an idea?
Yeah, idea. It has to start somewhere, the discussion, and these discussions need to happen with iwi as well to get that right. And I think Metapsel can probably add, we've got meetings coming up around that.
Actually, just before we move on, just Metapsel, did you want to
Yeah,
make some comments?
I just wondered if Nick wanted to make any comments on this, because I think these are sort of models that are already in place elsewhere. And so so I suppose even as a working group, these were the straw model discussion starters that came to us. Based on the discussion at the working group, it appears that the one vote each would be preferred, and likely what all of the other Eastern councils will put forward, except for Whakatane, who did, sorry, something's echoing, except for Whakatane, who did say, well, what if it's, pure co-governance in the same amount or double what has been suggested? And the feedback that we gave them was actually one may be best, but again, we haven't finalised that yet. There is a working group with iwi and they'll come back to us. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Sorry, I might come back to that.
Okay. No, cool. Thank you. That's a good response. And I've got one more question, if that's okay, Madam Chair. Or just a comment regarding that. I think with that representative model, unless there's some rule that I'm unaware of regarding it, but it sounds as though it's just come through a sort of workshop type process, it would be good to have more representatives for the territorial authorities, proportional based obviously on their whatever their votes and things like that are, but primarily for that check and balance in terms of the territorial authorities. I'm always very mindful of a single person having the ability to represent the thoughts of an entire territorial authority, as we've sort of seen through this unitary authority process. Things go up and down all the time. The other question I had was regarding the iwi position. So I suppose there's several models across the country, several models across the region regarding iwi representation. Having iwi there, does that exclude other PSGEs or iwi that haven't settled, or have we thought that far? Because probably one of my largest concerns for the 4 iwi reps is that we've got twice the amount of iwi here, but Mātātua have twice the population in terms of iwi population sizes versus the actual amount of iwi. So the division of 4 representatives for iwi across the region, I think, will be very, very, very complex. So I don't know how have we arrived at that particular number, and have there been conversations in the working group around that division?
Will you answer that first, Craig? And then we'll move to...
Okay. So the specific makeup has been, and I think we'll start with the working groups agreed on a principle that iwi should be involved at that level. The actual ins and outs of the numbers is this the starting point. Yeah. Bearing in mind that some of the iwi engagement that's happened across the rohi, though, it's a lot simpler than here, and we've been in that, I suppose, that transition which Michelle's explained a few times of trying to, who is the right person? If they say one person goes to a working group meeting, who is that right person to represent our area in there? And that hasn't really been that clear. So at the moment we're still trying to navigate that space, and I think at pace, but bearing in mind that it's taken quite a long time to get to this point, and a lot of our partners, because we have landowners, PSGs, we've got so many different arrangements here. I think I saw something the other day that said something like 42, but across the others it can only, it's like 8 total across the rest of the rohi. So navigating it's difficult, but it has to be done. And the answer around what it could be is it needs to be what this area wants, because everything's bespoke as it's been set up across the country. Each partnership or each arrangement, whether it's Iowai, Te Aki Wai, Waikato Waters, it's just specific to what they want right now. And some of them are for review as well. So we don't have the answer. And the for a better reason, my understanding, that was just everyone agreed it's a good place to start the conversation with it like that. Yeah. Okay.
No, that's good too. And I think even just that it's a starting point is a reassuring point as well. But yeah, that's just something I wanted to raise, because in addition to iwi, just like you raised it, well, I think some of the most significant players regarding water in Aotearoa are those land trusts and are those landowners as well. So there is a potential for their voice to be lost through iwi. Likewise with unsettled iwi, I think in Mātātua with a couple of unsettled iwi in that rohe. So yeah, no, okay, that's given me a good step. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just check in with Nick. Was there any further comments you wish to make on that particular question?
No, I think Craig did a really good job of summarising it. I think the clear view at the Waters Working Group last meeting was that any process needs to be a mandated process in terms of nominating representatives. So that is that's another part of this. But I think looking across the rest of the country, there's probably limited insight from those different models for your particular region because of the complexity of the arrangements here. So it really does need to be developed from the ground up. The only other thing I would say is that just in terms of the overall numbers, obviously one of the principles that you're trying to work with here is just workability of the size of the group, and that does bring some constraints to bear.
Thank you, Nick. Councillor Patterson, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I apologise, I wasn't at the first hui, so this may have been addressed already. Just to clarify, the Water Services CCO, does that operate under the Companies Act?
Yes, it does. Well, it operates under the Local Government Water Services Act, but also under the Companies Act, because these are companies, and so directors that are appointed to them are also caught by the provisions of the Companies Act.
Thank you. Second question on that same topic then, the representative forum, given that they will be made up of largely elected members, will they be governed by the Local Government Act?
So the details of the representative forum often joint council committees is the way that they've been structured. So in that sense, yes, they are, but the particular design of the representative arrangements, that they are usually provided for within a partners agreement or a shareholders agreement. That's the mechanism for setting them up.
The reason I asked that question is because of the recent ruling from Minister Watts regarding non-elected members on getting involved in local government business. So how are our iwi partners going to be represented with this legally if he's saying you can't do that?
Yeah, so we are aware, obviously, the Minister's announcement in June that only elected councillors will be able to vote on council committees. There isn't as yet a lot of detail around exactly what that looks like in a legislative sense. So the Minister indicated that that proposal would be given effect to through changes to the Local Government System Improvements Bill. That bill's currently making its way through Parliament at the moment. It's had its second reading. It's up to the Committee of the Whole House stage. But the specific amendment which would make the change has not yet been made public. And we are aware as well that the Minister has indicated that there would be some exclusions in terms of that particular policy. So for statutory committees and appointments, including those agreed as part of a treaty settlement, would be excluded, for example. So it's a little bit difficult to say precisely until we see the details of the changes. But obviously, if there is a change in the law, then that would need to be reflected in any governance arrangements. And the only other thing I would say is that the government's been clear that councils can still appoint non-elected members to offer advice or represent communities, provided that those appointments don't come with voting rights. So there's a few things to kind of work through there.
Yes, thank you. That is a big difference, advice versus voting rights. The last one I just wanted to pick up on, you talked about potential dividends from any water services CCO, and yet I heard earlier you mentioned that we couldn't, or they could not divest shares in the company because effectively they wouldn't have any value because they're supposed to be non-for-profit. So how do you have dividends and not-for-profit?
Yeah, well, there's two separate things there. So firstly, there's no prohibition under the legislation on the ability for these companies to pay dividends should they choose to. So that's a matter that's up to shareholders to decide when they're setting the companies up. And I think universally so far, in terms of the companies that have been set up around the country, they've been set up with a restriction or a prohibition on the ability to pay dividends. The question of ownership is a slightly different one, in the sense that the only entities that can be shareholders of a water services CCO are either a shareholding council or a consumer trust. So that does, of course, limit any benefit from selling shares from a pecuniary purpose. But what it does allow is for shareholding of these water companies to change over time, for example, by bringing new councils into the mix or mergers of water services organisations. So two slightly different issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I've got a further question from Councillor Te Marabenfell.
Kia ora, thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Can I just ask a question regarding how do we best feed into the structure, or I suppose best feed into the process? Is it through these workshops, or is it directly through our working group members? Is it through, I suppose, what's the best to provide feedback in terms of some of these structures and things like that?
She might get Craig to
Probably
talk
you
to our
question,
process.
Craig.
Yeah, I think both is the answer. Like, I can take any feedback you've got and pass it on, and these guys go to the table and actually have the discussions with the other groups. So it's sort of like there's both are equally as valuable. But anything you have, I can always pass back through the channels that I work in every week to make sure it gets represented. Like, I will meet with Nick at least once a week. Russell's there as well as our colleagues across the program team, where we, like, as these things are being worked up now, and the working group also gets a look, and also our working group members are on the PSG, which Stavros heads with some of the executive members, so we have those discussions there too. So any feedback is welcome towards me anyway. I'm sure it's the same with the others.
Councillor Wang has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Nick, and all of you for the presentation. Questions just following similar conversations that we've already had, just on the option to provide for the independent chair, and how that would work into, or either of those examples given there, and would they take up one of the spots? Would there be an additional one? How would that be decided? Or how would the decision of the appointing the independent chair be decided as well?
I'll go to Nick first.
Sorry, somebody may need to repeat the question for me. It was just the microphone's a bit variable depending on who's speaking, so if somebody could repeat the question.
Sorry, yes. Can you hear a bit better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. Just a question on the option to provide for the independent chair. So how that would work with those two examples that you have in the presentation, and whether or not that would be an additional, representative in that forum option, or the voting rights, and how that would work, and also how it would work for appointing that independent chair.
Yeah, so that option or that approach could work across either of those two options. It's on the A3. What we've seen is a couple of different models. So some take the approach of the representatives are the representatives appointed by their nominating shareholding councils and nominated by a rōpū established to appoint iwi reps, for example. Once appointed, the group can choose its chair. So that is one model. Another model that has been used, and it's used, for example, with Tiaki Wai in Wellington, is for the shareholders to appoint an independent person, recognising that these are, there are different interests across the different representatives, and it can be useful sometimes to have that independent voice. So in Wellington's case, it's Dame Prendergast, who's been appointed as the chair of the Partners Committee. In that particular circumstance, I don't believe that they have a voting role. It's more of a chair and facilitation role that they play. But the arrangement can work however councillors choose for it to work. Really, there's no real restrictions around that.
Thank you, Nick. Does that answer your question? Great. Councillor Maxwell has a question.
Thank you, guys. The question I have is what I hear from out there with our people, and that is one, and especially here in Rotorua, we have built over many, many years strong relationships with iwi hapu. How do we try and reassure them, or even reassure ourselves, that council obligations to hapu and iwi are valued and honoured? I was encouraged a little bit earlier when these options came up, and you said you preferred one, which is an indication that I'm feeling comfortable with. But how do we really ensure we have protocols with hapu and iwi, and also some, like a good example, my own iwi, Ngāti Rangi, where you've got a strong relationship now. Yeah, thank you, great.
Kia ora, Councillor Maxwell. I think the first point to start with is in the strategic objectives, it's really stressed there. Also in the legislation, it says that what currently exists needs to be looked after. So those arrangements or the special, whether it's a treaty settlement that's happened in our rohi or those sort of things have to be taken care of. The legislation doesn't move those anywhere. The responsibility of the relationship and those things, that's probably the bit that really needs to be sorted out in this work, about how and what transfers, if you enter a CCO, what sort of relationship and working responsibility goes there. We've also got the relationship between, basically the mana to mana relationship of the council and the landowner, and how does that maintain. So all of those things still have to be detailed through, and that's probably the rich conversation that we are starting really with our landowners and partners across the rohi now. It is something that we have to get a good grasp on, and we do currently have a lot of bespoke arrangements because of our particular, whether we're sharing a land asset or we have joint consents or there's some aspirations that are mixed up in that, and how do we give effect to those going through. But I think it's clear from the work the Waters Group has done is that there is a strategic imperative that needs to be balanced when the assessments are done. And as I said before, there was a consensus across the working group that it was important to have iwi recognised in how this goes forward. So the legislation doesn't reduce anything that is there now. It's how you make it, I suppose, enduring, or you make it work in the new arrangements. Yeah.
Thank you, Craig. I've got a question from Councillor Lee, and then we'll finish with Councillor Timera Benfell. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see that what you have proposed in option 1 is 1 vote for each of the 4 councils and 4 votes for iwi. I guess this is what you'd call a co-governance model.
Who is that question for, Councillor?
I don't know who it's for, whoever wants to answer it.
I can answer that. No, it's actually down the bottom of the graph, or of the diagram, it's 6 votes for Rotorua, 4 votes for Whakatane, 2 votes for the other 2 councils, and then 1 vote each for each of the 4 iwi reps. It's not 1 vote each.
I do see that. Nevertheless, it's still 8 persons made up of 4 persons, isn't it? Option 2 is clearly not a co-governance option, so what would you call option 1? If it's not co-governance.
I would call it option 1 with iwi reps.
So,
has, the government seems to be a little less inclined towards iwi representation and rights than it has been in the past. Has this model been put past the DIA or whatever their successor organisation is now called?
thank you, Craig.
All the models that have been adopted across the country have all been signed off under the legislation, so they've all been established with the various shareholding and representative groups, and that's where they are, and they're up operating. So, yeah, this here is a straw man, which is the beginning of that conversation to what it might look like. But when you get through detailed design, that would actually have the finalised model. But yeah, the ones that have been put in have their respective representative arrangements are in and legal and operating.
Is there anything Nick would like to add on that question?
Only to add that this is an evolving legislative space. Just to reinforce Craig's point that there's at least 4 entities currently operating with various forms of iwi representation. There's also examples of one that we're aware of that doesn't have it, and this is the model that's come out of this Waters Working Group process. And obviously, as Craig has said, it's a straw person proposal and would need to be worked through and developed up further.
Well, thank you, Nick. And also that this report will come back to this council again so that you can have further input and comment on it later on. Is there any other questions there, Councillor Lee?
No, I don't think so. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Timera Benfell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to know if it was appropriate. I do have one question, but I do also have some feedback. So is it an appropriate time to provide that?
Yes, we will do that. Yeah, you can do it. Yes, that's fine. And then we'll have to move on because I'm just aware of the time. So yes,
Yep,
go
excellent.
ahead.
No, I'll fire through. This is a question to our working group members regarding the threshold section under representative oversight. Just based on the meetings and working group things that you've been a part of, which of those options do you think is, I suppose, most strategic for us as a territorial authority looking or exploring this CCO of option 1 and 2?
I'm looking towards
Sorry for picking on
working
you
group
guys.
members. There was already some commentary made.
Maybe Craig as well, I don't know.
I'm just circling it. Sorry. That's on that bit down there? Yeah.
I note that earlier Councillor Sanford was talking about how to preserve our voting majority, but I'll leave him to make further comments.
Yeah, I guess my comment's not actually all that helpful to answer the question. It's been discussed, but not in huge detail. We brought it up a couple of times in terms of, making sure that it's consistent in the report, because it's mentioned a couple of times in the report, so that's sort of been our focus there. We haven't landed on, what of those two particular options would be best, and which one should go forward, but I think it's, as a council and as a group, it's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on, because how we go back in the final detail, if we get to that stage, is going to be really important. So to be discussed more, I would say.
Okay.
And it will come back to this council as well. So there's one more working group meeting, and then comes to a council decision as well.
Thank you.
So if I can, through you, Madam Chair, just provide some quick feedback based on what we've seen. I think the voting rights presented in option 1 are positive. I think potentially Rotorua is missing a vote based on the proportional representation. I would be interested to hear the working group's thoughts on increasing the amount of representatives to a model of, say, 2 votes per representative. So, for example, 3 for Rotorua, 2 for Whakatane, and 1 each for Pōtiki and Kawarau. In terms of the iwi representatives in terms of the iwi representative model, I don't think it would be wise to do them by territorial authority, and the only reason is because some territorial authorities within our region only have 1 iwi and others have 15 or 8 or, whatever that might look like, so it would dilute the voice of those iwi and those Arohe just purely based on how many iwi. So I think at a high-level ideas level, potentially it is a forum of all of those iwi chairs across the entire region to decide what that might look like. I think it's clear, but I'm supportive of option 1, and in terms of threshold, I'm supportive of option 2, primarily because it gives each of the representatives that are part of the representative oversight model proportional power in terms of their voting rights, as opposed to being shareholder-based, is how I read option 1. It's primarily shareholder-based, so I'd probably lean more towards option 2 in terms of thresholds. Just some initial feedback.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair. Just a very quick question, just to clarify the difference in my mind, relating back to comments Sam made previously regarding the transition from one company to another, that agreements that you might have in place with Company A when that gets bought or has new governance, those agreements may not necessarily transfer over. So my question is, I understand treaty settlements are governed by an act. It's usually enacted by an act, a treaty settlement, but a partnership agreement between Rotorua Lakes Council and Ngāti Kiro, Ngāti Tuara or Ngāti Rangiwewehi, that's not the same. So technically, how are we going to make sure that if, let's say, for example, we become something else, that is protected going forward? Or do we just have to start from scratch?
Yeah, going down into the legal advice we're probably seeking now to help guide us. We have arrangements that are in place now, and what we have to do is have conversations for whichever way it goes about what does that look like and what are the right, I suppose, instruments or whatever to transfer, whether it's a relationship or an asset. There are certain things in the Act and the legislation. Nick might be able to help me out, but it's a little bit, I think he mentioned it before, we're a little bit more complicated in some of those that we have across our area. And Each of them has to be examined. I saw something from Michelle this morning to talk exactly about that. Each has to be examined and looked at. We have to work out to make sure we have all of them mapped out and understand the relationships and what the obligations are, and then actually sit down with those people and work out, okay, so what is happening here? Whatever decision goes one way or the other, how will that impact these and how do we give effect? Because remembering the strategic objective is to make sure we give effect to all of those that we have. It's not reducing them. So what are the mechanisms and tools we need to do to make sure that they still exist? Whether it's, like the shared consent you talk about for drawing water. And because there's certain things where we don't own it, we have a relationship. So it's how does that work? And assets coming into something where you don't own it, that probably doesn't happen. So it's how do you give effect to the actual mechanism on top of that? Nick, have I fudged that enough, or have I need more detail?
I think that's good. I think the only other thing I would add to that is, there is provision in the way that these transactions, the way that the transfer of responsibility from council to a water services CCO in terms of delivering water services occurs is through a transfer agreement. So there is a formal agreement that needs to be entered into both by the incoming board of a water services CCO and each of the shareholding councils, and that's the term transfer agreement captures quite a broad range of matters. So it includes the assets that are being transferred and the debt, but it also has provision for any undertaking that currently resides with the council that is formal and can be codified to also transfer along with the other obligations. So depending on the specific nature of the obligations that you're talking about, there may be a legal answer to that question. Otherwise, there are potentially other routes as well for ensuring that the board of a water company is upholding those obligations, including through the statement of expectations and providing for those obligations through that mechanism. So I think there's a multi-pronged approach here, potentially, but there's quite a lot of detail to kind of work through there in relation to all of the different undertakings that council currently has, and ensuring that the water services organisation will continue to uphold those.
Thank you.
Thank you. A question from Councillor Lee, then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm looking at the second page of this handout, which is titled at the top, Rotorua and EBOP WSCCO. As of course you're all aware, our council has some decisions to make about Head Start, and one of the reasonably practicable options would be Rotorua becoming its own unitary authority. So if hypothetically we were to go down that road, what is this information that we are holding? How would we go about considering that? What would be the implications of that?
Through you, Madam Chair, the straight answer is that we don't know at this point in time. However, just remind elected members that there's going to be a working group meeting in August sometime, I can't remember the exact date. Then this council will have to make a final decision knowing all the facts you know and the facts you don't know by late September as to what path you're going to go. Between August and September, we'll try to have another workshop to again navigate through the evolving and emerging information, but ultimately, you as elected members in September, you may decide which path you want to follow. You might decide not to go anywhere. You might decide to go for a CCO. You might decide to go on in-house business unit. I can't tell. We can't, as officers, we can't tell you which direction to take. All we recognize there is an uncertainty in the horizon. We will put in front of you all the available information, and you make that decision, duly informed by that process. Thank you.
So all the information presented to us today concerns the Eastern Bay of Plenty proposal specifically, is that right?
or this information you had in front of you is consistent with the delivery plan promise we have made to the Minister in September last year to explore the merits of a joint CCO between Rotorua Lakes, Whakatane, Kaurau and Opotiki. That is ring-fenced against that promise we have made to the Minister, and the Minister approved it. Obviously, there are new facts and new things evolving all the time, but we're giving effect to that delivery plan we have committed to the Minister in September last year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Brown.
I've just been flicking forward. I don't see where we talk about costs and risks. Are we dealing with that at some point?
Are you speaking about implementation?
I'm talking about all of the work that needs to be done, talking to PSGs and iwi representatives, and the fact that we provide most of the benefit, but we seem to have potentially a voting platform that exposes us to risk, shall we say?
What I was going to say is that when the draft report, and it's probably, our error that you didn't get it earlier this week, but there is some assessments of each council's position in here, and that's probably the information that will help you with that, Councillor Brown. When we did the financials, that was in the previous workshop, Nick would have talked about the financials pluses and minuses, but the actual, when you start looking at the risks against them in each of those 7 strategic objectives, they're mapped out in that draft report as it currently lies. And there is I think it's like a traffic colour sort of that talks about the heat on those, but green, orange and so forth. So I think that gives some exposure to that, but we haven't talked about the draft report yet. We've been talking about the particular inputs that go into it. And then once they're all in there, that's when the assessment around what is risky, what is looking like a preferred option or a workable option, those are the sort of things that come together there. Have I answered that one right too, Nick?
Yeah, that's right. And there was, as part of an implementation plan draft that was considered by the Waters Working Group.
Yeah.
Couple of months back now, I think there was a risks and mitigations set of analysis in there when it comes particularly to the implementation risks. So that is something that could be circulated potentially as well.
You've got it, eh?
Okay, so we'll see that in the future. That's good. That's the assurance I needed. Can I just, and I think I raised this last time, there seemed to be a positivity bias in the modelling. We've plucked some models that have worked elsewhere. If we added some of the models that potentially don't work, Auckland Waters, Wellington Waters, into the modelling, do we get a completely different result?
I'll leave that one maybe with Nick.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we did touch on this briefly at the last workshop. So we have looked at what we believe are to be the most relevant examples and evidence when developing the assumptions, and a key part of the current local water done well proposals is recognising that these organisations are natural monopolies and will be subject to economic regulation. So we've looked at evidence in relation to jurisdictions where that approach to reform has been taken, and by and large you do find that there are productivity improvements in relation to the management of the infrastructure and the delivery of services. The Wellington Water example is not one that we believe is a good example because it's not an asset owning water company. It was funded effectively by the councils on a sort of an annual basis, and was not subject to the sort of regulation that will be in place for these new water services organisations. So we don't consider that to be a particularly comparable model.
Okay, that's a good response. Thank you.
Thank you. Just following on, Nick, just to follow on from their questions, the assumptions you've used are about 0.75% efficiency gains. Is that right, or have I? So, and factored in with an inflation of around 3% or thereabouts. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't actually have the financial report to hand. We presented that at the last, but that sounds about right. There are two separate sets of efficiency assumptions, as assumptions in relation to operating efficiency and in relation to capital efficiency. I think the figure that you cited is probably in relation to the capital efficiency assumption. What we did was we have looked pretty widely at the most comparable examples, which are often in states of Australia where you have water utilities of a similar size and geography to the ones that we're talking about in New Zealand, and we've looked at what 20 years of history shows has been achieved in terms of efficiency gains under the different economic regulatory arrangements that are in place in those jurisdictions, and it's pretty well studied and evidenced in those places, and we would expect that over time the Commerce Commission will be producing a similar set of evidence around New Zealand reforms. So we believe that the efficiency assumptions that we've chosen are at the conservative end of the spectrum. We haven't wanted to be accused of overstating the benefits. I appreciate that there is no certainty when you're talking about the future. I certainly hear the comments that have been made around a positivity bias, but we don't believe that we have overstated what is possible relative to the evidence that we have available to us.
Thank you, Nick. It looks to be the questions for the moment, so I might just progress through the presentation if that's okay.
Thank you. So our final report will include a draft implementation plan outlining the practical steps and timeline associated with implementing the Water Services CCO, should councils choose to proceed with that. It's important to note that the draft plan doesn't prejudge the council decisions in any way. It merely supports council decision making by making it clear what the practical implications would be. So we anticipate that implementation would proceed through several phases, and if you look around the country, each of the water services organisations that have been established have gone through or are going through a similar process. So the first stage is the pre-establishment phase, which would include council consideration of the report, a decision around whether or not to proceed to consultation, resolution to establish a water services CCO, and then entering into a commitment agreement or some form of arrangements, MOU, for example, so that all of the parties are clear on the high-level basis that they're sort of signing up to, and that step is quite important for avoiding missteps down the line. The next phase would be the establishment phase itself, which would include detailed establishment planning, setting up the transition team, initiating due diligence, developing the foundation documents, including the constitution and shareholders agreement, and then proceeding with board appointments and company incorporation. The third stage is the transition stage. It usually takes around 18 months, 12 to 18 months, and would include the development of the statement of expectations, the org design, the transfer of staff from councils to the new water company, recruitment of any senior leadership positions, operational readiness planning, and then preparing the water services strategy and transfer agreements and the process for LGFA sessions. So quite a big job, as I'm sure you'd appreciate, to establish these new companies, and then you're into the operations following day one, go live, and then obviously the period of sort of bedding in. So that would be the process in terms of how it could unfold. And then on the next slide, we just break that down a little bit more to give you a sense of what the timeline could look like around that. If you want to just move to the next slide. So this is just an indicative timeline And the key dates are at the final CCO investigation report, obviously completed next month. The Waters Working Group would then put a recommendation to partnering councils to consider in September. Preferred option, obviously if you choose to proceed, could be taken to consultation through that October period, and then a final decision sought in December. Now this timeline, detailed timeline, was obviously developed in advance of the government announcing its Head Start process. So it would be up to each council ultimately to determine what process to follow from there. But this provides an indicative pathway of what that timeline could look like out to a potential go-live date of 1st of July 2028.
Just wondering if there's any questions. Yes, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just looking at the next, I guess you could say, major decision point, which is September. What happens if we decide to retain an in-house business unit? Does that then have to go out for consultation as well?
So as I understand it, Councillor Patterson, we will have a workshop once the final report comes back from the working group, and then councillors will make a decision in September about what their preferred option is out of the two that have been modelled for us through the working group, and then we will go out to the community with our preferred option, both options with all the information side by side for them to give us their feedback, and then we'll move on to the next decision, which would be in November. Craig might like to correct me on all this.
Yeah, no, the process would be to get some feedback from the public in November. There could be hearings because it would be under SCP, so there could be hearings. I think there's some dates set aside for some potential hearings, and you'd hear that evidence, and then there would be a decision report to council in, I think it's December the 9th. Yeah, so that would bring to you whatever it was that you'd put out there with the comparisons, the evidence that's come, and whatever feedback has come back into that time for make that final decision. Yeah.
So, subsequent question, would the information about what retaining an in-house business unit be included in those options for people to see?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And councillors, when you go and have a look at the draft report, towards the back of it, around page 90, there is a comparison there of the two models, what it looks like for Rotorua to date, so it gives you an idea of the information that we have to hand at the moment. So that should have dropped into Stella today sometime. Any further questions? I will move on. Thank you, Nick. I'll leave it over to you.
Thank you. So just move on. So obviously between the start of the last workshop and today, we've had a further Waters Working Group meeting last week. And at that meeting, our draft final report was considered, and we sought feedback from the Waters Working Group on that report. We thought it was useful for that working group just to kind of recap on the process so far. So it has been a multi-month process, and it goes right back to the beginning of this year. And back in February, March, we were still discussing the sort of the strategic objectives and the approach to the analysis. In April, we took the Waters Working Group through the initial high-level strategic assessment of the different options, presented the interim 10-year financial modelling, and had an initial discussion around stormwater as well. As part of that, the Waters Working Group agreed to take an in-house delivery and joint asset owning water services CCO through as a shortlisted set of options for more detailed analysis. The working group also requested more information to support decision making on stormwater, which we took to them in May, and as well as that, we provided further financial report looking out over a longer period, over a 30-year period, and also had an initial discussion around the ownership, representation, governance choices. At the May meeting, the Waters Working Group provided us with direction to base the analysis and assessment of options on a 3 waters joint water services CCO, so inclusive of stormwater, and also requested that straw person option to be developed to support further consideration of the ownership, representation and governance choices. And then in June, we took that straw person back alongside comparators from a number of other entities around the country. We also tabled the high-level implementation plan, and we presented the final 30-year financial assessment report, which was discussed with you on the 14th of July. And then we also had a further discussion around the ownership, representation and governance arrangements, which led to some refinements to that model. So last week, as I mentioned, we presented our final draft report. If you move to the next slide, this is where all of the analysis that has been done to date over several months comes together. We've, through the report, reflected the process that the Water Working Group has followed and the decisions that they've made along the way. So it sets out the strategic objectives that we've used to assess options. The shortlisting process discusses where the Waters Working Group landed in relation to the stormwater question, and also sets out the proposal in relation to ownership, representation and governance arrangements. We've sought to try to write that as a standalone report so that somebody can pick it up and make sense of it, with the detailed companion papers providing further detail to be published alongside that. And we have proposed to the Waters Working Group that each council publishes the same material on its website, including details of the Waters Working Group meetings and minutes, so that if somebody wanted to track through the process, they can see everything that was considered by the Waters Working Group. In relation to new material, there's not a lot of new material in the report because it's been built up over a sequence of months, but there are a few things. We have included a reference to the Head Start process, and in relation to feedback provided by the Waters Working Group last week, we'll also expand that to also cover off the other government announcements that have been made, including in relation to the role of unelected members. And so we will just note that the external environment or the government reform landscape has changed during the course of the study. We've also integrated the financial modelling results into the strategic assessment. That hasn't resulted in any fundamental changes to the overall assessment, but just ensures that the final report is based on the latest available modelling. And finally, we've added, as an appendix to the study, individual council assessments, and that was referred to just briefly before. So for each council, we've stepped through an assessment of in-house delivery against a joint water services CCO model against each of the strategic objectives. Broadly, I think the feedback was pretty positive on the report last week. We did get some confirmation of the indicative ownership, representation and governance arrangements. We did get some feedback as well that we are incorporating into the final report, which will be presented to the Waters Working Group meeting in August. But I'm conscious that I think that report was only circulated potentially this morning, so happy to take further questions around that if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
Thank you, Nick. Are there any further questions, councillors? There doesn't appear to be any at this stage. Do you just want to continue through the presentation and then we'll take it from there?
So I think from my perspective, we've largely covered what we were going to cover. This slide here is the last one I was going to present. It broadly follows the material that was on the A3 that was circulated. So we sought from the Waters Working Group confirmation of the indicative ownership, representation and governance arrangements, and that will obviously, the Waters Working Group view on that will be recorded in our group. So each of the matters that are on this slide, I think we've probably covered them off already when we talked about the A3, but suffice to say that the Waters Working Group largely confirmed the arrangements as we've discussed them today, and as I noted, expressing a preference for option 1, which was on that earlier slide.
Thank you, Nick. And I think the last slide is some key dates. Are you going to speak to that one, Craig?
Yes, I will. But first, I'll just thank you, Nick, for your contribution again. Thank you very much. I mean, we've talked throughout this today that there's things coming up, and I think we've probably laboured the point that things are coming back, but the crucial ones is the working group will finalise their report and then essentially finish their work by handing that to councils to deal with. And I think that will happen shortly after the 17th of August, which is the last working group date. So depending on how long it takes to actually move that from one place to another, we expect to have a workshop with the final report with elected members soon after that, which will then work towards the, I think you'll be getting a presentation from Taumata Arawai and Commerce Commission in an infrastructure committee meeting
on the 12th.
On the 12th of August, isn't it? Yeah. So that's the week before that. So that'll bring you some more information about what's happened in their worlds, I think, since this has started working across the country. So we'll have representatives either in the room or online talking then. And then obviously we have to work out what is the preferred option. So you'll have a decision to make around what happens there. And we go through that consultation through October. And then we'll consider that in November. We've covered that. I think I just want to go back to one slide, and I'm thinking it's because Andrew's voice is in my head about something he's gone across a couple of times, and it's the head start in this and how there is some, I suppose when you make some decisions, there's some overlap that gives you a chance to look at the decisions that are made and how it might impact what you're thinking as you go through. If you go right down to that bottom of that slide, the Head Start proposal, obviously, I think you've got a council meeting this week where you're looking at options and a possible decision. Then that goes to government. It's early next week or mid next week. Yeah, and then sometime in September, Cabinet's meant to make some decisions around who's going or who's in the backstop. And then that also aligns with this because you'll be in that preferred option stage. And then there's a couple other dates that Andrews thinks are important to also assess, is that obviously in November there'll be a change of government or into whatever the new government is. That's what I mean by change. So that result may have some impact or may not on things. So all of these things, there is some time in amongst them as to when you're considering decisions. It's not so much that you won't know some of that information that you've asked about before that. So some of these things will naturally reveal themselves, I suppose, across this process. And remembering that we've brought forward the decision on this into December, the arrangement we had with government originally, our original water service delivery plan had us making that final decision in February of next year. So there is a bit of wiggle room around thinking and discussing as it goes. So we wouldn't be, if we didn't hit that December deadline for whatever reason, it wouldn't be an issue until we're probably not meeting a February one, and then the government would probably have a please explain to us. But so there is an ability to work both these things into each other.
Thank you, Craig. Are there any further questions, councillors? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, and sorry I didn't realise the report had been uploaded to Stella. I haven't had a chance to look at it. But does it break down, for example, I know it's important to us, but maybe not so important to our Eastern Bay of Plenty fellow councils, how many partnership agreements we have with Mana Whenua and Iwi versus theirs?
Yes, there's there's a developing page in there. There's one that's under construction now because when it was first looked at, I think some of the partnerships that were referred to were only water related, but obviously there's some shared partnerships with forestry and other things, so that ours will be amended in the final version. So the one that's there now is not, I would say, not exhaustive. It's the beginning of something. There's some numbers that we started with, but it's been only as of today, I think, finalised to go down to Martin Jenkins with our team here to make sure we were including all the right people.
Thank you.
Thank you. And at the moment, that's on page 18. Yeah, as it stands. So there appears... Oh, yes, another question. No. I think Stavros has got some further comments. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to all elected members. I think obviously there is a lot of work in progress between now and September to arrive at a point where elected members can make an informed decision on preferences. We need to recognise that representation is significant work in progress, and obviously that will be subject to further discussions, and it's a complex process. Also, I wanted to urge elected members to consider and factor into their thinking that Martin Jenkins have presented to the best of their ability a focused financial model to 2054, for the next 25 or so years, and I think with the best of their available information, they are presenting some I think they are modest potential savings behind that. One can argue and debate them, but that's what the modelling provides for us. Again, so from our perspective as officers, just to remind all of us that jurisdiction to represent ratepayers rests exclusively with elected members. That representation of ratepayers is really the exclusive prerogative of elected members, or responsibility of elected members. Now, also a potential setup of CCO, the directors of the CCO will be responsible for CCO's solvency and obviously compliance with the relevant regulations. And again, if in the event where they perceive that the actual cost of delivering the services is increased to what's been forecasted, it will be their duty to increase their revenue by upping their rates to match those kind of costs. Ultimately, also the representatives of any representative forum, doesn't matter what its composition will be, will not have liabilities. The liabilities will rest eventually with elected members of each individual council. Now, all potential liabilities will fall back to the council if the CCO fails in any particular financial model, and all costs and liabilities ultimately fall the same rate paid. There is a distribution of how you incur costs, or you borrow money, but the same ratepayer who pays the rates to the council also pays for the services the Three Waters Company will deliver. And finally, obviously, with the Rotorua Lakes Council comprising potentially 60 to 65% of the assets, whatever happens with the CCO, we need to be cognizant of the fact that the Rotorua Lakes, ratepayers forum, body will carry 60 to 65% of potential liabilities. So when all this information comes to you, eventually in August and September, that's the point in time where you have to, be cognizant of those, factors and make the necessary decisions. But it is quite important to emphasize again that, doesn't matter what your delivery model is, the ultimately liability rests with this council. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stavros, for the context. I appreciate that. And I'll just maybe go to Nick to see if he's got any final comments that he'd like to share with us before we close off today.
No, nothing further to add. Thank you for the invitation to present to you.
Thank you, Nick. I would just like to acknowledge the significant contribution you and your team at Martin Jenkins have made to this body of work. We know that you've been working really closely with our team at Council, and appreciate your time to come and sit with us and answer our questions. It's been most helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions or comments, councillors, we might finish off for today. There's nothing further from the team? Thank you very much. I might invite Councillor Maxwell, would you consider closing, or Councillor Timothy Benfell with the karakia. Thank you.
Pai kia ora tātou, mihi ana ki ngā kōrero I wharekihia I tēnei ahihei. Ana reira mihi ana ki ngā kaimahi o tō tātou kaunihira. I kawe nei ngā kaupapa nui kei mui a tātou I tēnei rā. Nā reira anei tō tātou karakia whakakapi. Kia iri tātou. Kia tau te rani mari hiruna ki tēnā tātou kia māhia te hua mā kehiki kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori kia tūturofi te whakamaua kia tīna, haumi e hui e, tāi ki e.
Thank you, councillors. The workshop is finished.